So anyway, like Catherine said, this part of a sort of series of Norman talks exploring, the year of the Normans is coming up. We're focusing on March to Prendergast. One of the first conversations we had with Catherine was who we're going to explore. I mean, everyone's sort of heard of Strongbows and even Raymond le Gros and the rest of them, but exploring the sort of second tier lords is kind of more important because Normans are incredibly practical people, and who actually did the work on the ground. Strongbow may have taken a lot of the credit in the end, and he gets his name in a lot of things, but these guys on the ground actually doing the legwork and putting the colony on the map, and ultimately actually the ones responsible for the downturn in the colony towards the 14th century as well. But we're going to concentrate today on the very early expansion. So first talk we did in Gorey Library was actually on Marsh Prendergast and his, under what we term the McMurrough campaigns. McMurrough was driving the campaigns in the very early stages. It wasn't a Strongbow oriented thing at all. And the Prendergast was one of the driving forces of that. You can see it, that's a 12th century crossbowman on foot and a mounted crossbowman as well. These guys were the shock troops of the early Norman expansion. The Irish had never really seen anything like it in the field. They may have seen crossbows. The Irish had travelled as mercenaries, and they probably knew about them, but to see them against you in the field was quite something. And these guys met Prendergast from Wales. They're actually of Flemish descent, and they're well known throughout the Angevin territories as having these really close knit crossbow sort of fraternities that were quite effective in the field. But so we'll crack on with that. We'll just have a little bit of an exploration of what this year of the Normans is about. So it's a European initiative. It's all across Europe, basically exploring the history and what the Normans contributed to modern Europe and how it's laid out. It's all around the 1000th year of William the Conqueror's birth. And like William is an absolutely fascinating character in his own right. And basically in Ireland we see the sort of 150 years of Norman rule in England suddenly expanding into Ireland, and the sort of collision of what that means. And whereas the Normans have been recognised in northern France for at least 200 years, the present initiative starts with the birth of William. So whenever you see Year of the Normans coming up, it's exploring the whole sort of thing. And like Ireland's quite fascinating because we're quite at the end of their expansion westward. They really can't go any further. So yeah, that's just a sort of an indication of what we're looking to explore. If you are fascinated in reading on more, David Bates' book on William the Conqueror, absolutely brilliant. William is just, you couldn't write the stuff, but he obviously has. The Normans in Ireland, that's quite well known in Strongbow. If you really can't get to sleep at night, Ireland Under the Normans by Orpin is a serious academic text. And as the person who sold it to me in Debré Books said, you do know there's no pictures, which was a little bit insulting, but there you go. And also Invasion 1169, that's coming out later on this year, and that's the results of a conference on. There's been a lot of rethinking of exactly what the Norman invasion went. I think we're moving beyond a sort of nationalist revulsion of the whole thing and sort of what did they actually do for us. And then in terms of Wexford itself, like you can't move in Wexford without Billy Colford's books. Arrogant Trespass and Medieval Wexford Essays in Memory of them are just the sort of backbone of anyone who's exploring this sort of text. And also things like Wexford castles, like they're sitting there. But these are sort of the backbone of what you're looking at. And then you go into things like Charters by Mary Traz Flanagan. She does a lot of work on that. Has a new book coming out this year on Strongbows charters in the very early days of the incursion. The word invasion even has done the rounds as well. Like, the more you look into the Normans coming into Ireland initially, it was a bit of a ragtag affair. And to be honest, Strongbow sent enough of his troops that he'd be quite happy if they didn't come back. And then it all went quite well for them. So the idea that they all came in a big boat and were gung-ho for it was, yeah, I think we've changed our minds slightly on it. It worked out well for them in the end, but there were periods, as you'll see, when it wasn't that quite secure. So, end of the last talk. Prendergast has gone to McMurrough at the end of about 1169 and says, look, we're not making any money here. We're cooked up in ferns. My guys are clamouring for plunder. They've been told they're coming to Ireland to make their fortunes. McMurrough has this kind of idea that he's going to retire his trip back to Ferns for the winter and recuperate. But that doesn't really suit these lads. They're on a timetable. Fitzstephen is rowing in behind McMurrough at the time, saying, well, we'll just sequester ourselves, recoup our strength in Ferns. This doesn't work for Prendergast. He goes to McMurrough and says, we're leaving. We'd like to go. We're the only mercenary trips. We're not making any money here. Fitzwilliam has been given already lands around Wexford for the successful taking of the town. But obviously Prendergast and his guys are saying, oh, this land's been handed out, but they're not actually getting anything out of it. So he goes to McMurrough. McMurrough says no. And Fitzstephen rolls in behind him. And Prendergast, being the wonderful example of a Welshman, just goes, well, that doesn't suit me, and just leaves. Fights their way to Ferns, fights their way to the neighbouring kingdom. And it's Donald Gilpatrick in Austria. And he accepts them in. He knows what they can do by this stage. They've seen what the crossbowmen and the ranks of them can do. He accepts them in. They go on the rampage against McMurrough. All was going well until his nobles turn around and go, actually, we're not going to pay these foreigners for work we could do ourselves. The king feels a bit guilty, tells Prendergast, who then fights his way through his kingdom to get to Waterford, gets in a boat, sails to Wales and goes, don't go back there. They're mental. Which is probably quite true. So that's where we're at. Basically, Prendergast has fought his way out of the Irish situation. He's left, his own Norman or, friends and whatever fighting for McMurrough, but he's decided with his trip, he's going home to Wales. Interesting enough, whilst he's heading to Haverford West, which is, in the middle of Wales, he actually makes a detour to Chepstow, which is originally Sturgo Castle. Strongbow was not the second Earl of Pembroke, as he's titled. Strongbow was on the wrong side of Henry II and has been since day one because his father supported the wrong side in the anarchy. So he never actually gets made an Earl. This is why Strongbow was down in his luck. Strongbow was allowed to hang on to Sturgo Castle as a sort of, that's your family lands, but he doesn't actually get the full Pembrokeshire patrimony because Henry II actually hates his guts. So, interesting enough, Prendergast goes straight to Chepstow Castle to kind of report. There's also interesting political machinations going on as well. That Prendergast chose to go to declare first rather than just going home in a huff and setting up on his own lands again. I think there's something in the background. It's plausible that he sought to meet with and try and recoup some financial reward. Strongbow had set up the entire thing. So it's quite impossible he turns up at Strongbow's front door and says, where's my money? I haven't been paid for any of this. My lads are outside. They've done their work. Where's the cash? But it's also may have been a conscious disengagement of the forces. Robert Fitzstephen and Roman the Grow are doing quite well in Ireland. But Strongbow's uncle is with them as a political advisor and sort of fixer. I think there's enough to suggest that maybe he sees that things are going too well. It's entirely possible that Strongbow was thought he was going to be done out of a marriage to Aoife. If he didn't appear on the scene soon, McMurrough was perfectly reasonable and go, well, Fitzstephen's done all the work. Should I just marry my daughter to him instead and make him, the new power base? I think Strongbow and his uncle are obviously in contact. I think there is an actual plan to take away the most effective part of that force, make them go back to Wales, and therefore weaken Fitzstephen. And last thing Strongbow wanted was to set up a rival lordship that he wasn't in charge of. So there's nice little political backstory going on there. And like I said, it's not the straightforward invasion that's always been kind of taught. De Clare, or Strongbow, a very competent military commander, well known for his bravery in the field and always been at the front of the battle. But like I say, his uncle, Henry de Montmorency, he's a fascinating character. There's a recent book was published by Butler there in the Invader series. He does a brilliant description of the uncle arriving at Strongbow's castle looking like a beggar with a bedraggled hair, and basically Strongbow's borrowed heavily from all these Jewish moneylenders to impress the King of Leinster. And when him and his uncle wander in, everyone laughs at him because they don't look like anything. And it gives a good description of him later on in the book as a sort of political fixer, and he's got sort of many fingers and many pies, but you're not quite sure where they're going. So, like I say, he's a fascinating character in his own right. He had a storied career in France before he arrives in Strongbow's circle, and he seems to be the kind of, like I say, he's like the Maurice de Regan of Strongbow's circle. So Maurice de Regan is the secretary of Strongbow, who seems to be able to converse in several languages and sort of sets up the meetings with Henry II originally. And so it's quite interesting. He sends this uncle, who's not actually a warrior, he's more of a political figure, with the original expedition to Bag-and-Bun. So there's obviously something going on in the background that's not quite clear. De Prendergast goes back. Now, he goes back to his own homelands and settles, but he comes back with Strongbow. Strongbow gets his forces together, gets a significant force, goes off to St. David's, and on the way he picks up Prendergast again. For de Prendergast to come back to Ireland must have taken something. We don't know what the conversation was, but we can sort of guess from his land grants later on. But the primary reason that Prendergast left was money. So that must have been, front and centre. What am I getting out of this? And he already knows that the money's not going to be flowing if he goes. So what's he promised? As part of his enticement to join the return expedition, I think he's promised land and title. The conversation about what he's going to get has to have already been on the board. And I think he ups his game. He says, if you need my troops, you need my crossbowmen, you're going to have to up the game. I don't want a bag of cash anymore. I want land. And that will get me up the social circle and then start making my own political and financial decisions. Just these ones here are actually crossbow bolts that are still in Waterford, in Reginald's Tower. And you've got, it just shows the importance of them. These are actually of the same period. They're the shotgun of the period. But they find quite a lot of these in the original excavations. And whereas they're probably from slightly later when the Normans get established, it just shows the prevalence of the crossbow and the importance of it. Anyone can pick one up. It takes about 10,000 hours to master a knightly, combat with a sword and to ride a horse and all the rest of it. Crossbows a couple of weeks. If you're anyway, good with it, you're going to do damage with it. But that's just a nice little indication that you can actually see sort of already sitting around. The Prendergast settlement. Now, Strongbow comes back. We have the Battle of Waterford. He makes a big splash. marries Aoife, cements his position. And then we have the taking of Dublin. And then McMurrough mysteriously dies very soon afterwards, and Strongbow's got it all. He's in line to be the next big dog in Leinster. But we fast forward to 1171 then. Henry Fitz-Empress, King of England, Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, Count of Anjou and Maine. This guy is the major power play across Europe. And he's landed in Waterford to exert control over de Clare and his forces. One of the largest feudal armies that's ever been seen. He's out to make a splash. And he's taking no for an answer. Henry II, that's a really good illustration of him. You can see a contemporary one. He's not this classy guy who's an emperor. Apparently Henry's quite the sort of soldier. The descriptions of him, he dresses in the finest silks, but always looks uncomfortable in them. And that's a very interesting point. Whereas he comes to make an impression, a lot of the people who see him are like, what, this can't be the emperor of the Angevin Empire. He's got this scruffy red beard and doesn't look comfortable in his position. And he doesn't just take the surrender of Strongbow and the Normans who've been there. He obviously takes the surrender of Irish kings who realise this is a big deal. Now, the Irish kings, to be honest, probably think they'll turn up, do their submissions, Henry will go away again, and then they'll just go back to normal. They don't seem to quite realise that it's not going to be as fluid as that. But the theatre of politics, there are several paintings and several tapestries of Strongbow bowing the knee on the Waterford quayside. It's all very formalised. The deal's been done long before that. As soon as Henry lands in Wales, there's an embargo set up of Ireland. A good old US trade war happening between England. Anyone who trades with Ireland is going to be kicked out, basically. So there's already an embargo. I think Strongbow, that's a warning shot across Strongbow's bows. Basically, I'm coming for you, and this is only a taster of it. And so, whereas we have Richard de Clare formally submitting on the quayside, he'd already sent his uncle and Raymond le Gros to negotiate with Henry II in Wales before he left. So the deal had been done. You're handing over Dublin, you're handing over the coastal cities. I'll hand you back Leinster reluctantly, but this has all been done. So the big submission on the quayside is all show. It's already been carefully choreographed. There's nothing left to chance here. Raymond le Gros is a really interesting choice as well. Raymond le Gros is again another soldier. Not the sort of commander doing in his bed at 10 o'clock at night. He's touring the sentry lines, and he's deliberately sent to negotiate with Henry because it's again the whole theatre. He sends a soldier to talk to another soldier. I think that's what does the job. Henry's there. Henry de Montse is in the background to make sure Raymond's not giving away anything he's not supposed to. But Raymond is there to go that, well, Henry, come on now, it's not that bad. So there's a whole it's not as clear cut. There's very careful thought being put into who's been sent where and on what they're going to say. And so by the time Henry sails, like I say, the deal's been done. So what does that entail? De Clare, again, like I said, he's not in Henry's good books. Henry realizes he has to do a deal with him in Leinster to hold on to it and basically to bring him in. The last thing Henry wants is an independent semi-Norman lordship setting up that just drifts away. And so he agrees to take the coastal cities off him. There's Dublin and its hinterland, which stretches the whole way down to, near Arklow. And that's mostly taken in sort of royal domain. And that has its own problems. Henry takes so much land near Dublin. The royal manors that are set up are so lackadaisical in their administration. There's no big stamp of Angevin authority. He just wants to make as much money as he can off them without too much investment. But De Clare's main sort of area is down here in Wexford, and this area in red, that's what the Prendergasts are originally given. So you've got three sort of lordship areas, Carnearn and stretching the whole way down to Ferrygenal and around Wexford. Wexford's important because this has been handed to Fitzstephen, and Henry II sort of has signed off on this. Strongbow and Fitzstephen have a very fractious relationship, and one of the big things about him sending him to Ireland was he would have been quite happy if he'd never come back. So him getting Wexford, Strongbow's already thinking, how can I hem this guy in? I don't need this. I need to seal off this sort of area here. In yellow, the Prendergast also pick up in 1192 after the death of Strongbow's son-in-law, De Quincey, who's the constable, and he gets killed in combat, and the Prendergast pick up there. So you can see, like, out of this area of Wexford, massive landholding has been handed to this guy who's not a major lord. Like, to manage lands of this size, you would sort of be expecting someone who has landowning experience, comes from a noble family, knows how to run these things. He's taken a bit of a punt on this guy, and it just shows, I think, what Prendergast has got out of Strongbow before he sailed. What was talked about, what was actually signed over. This is what it all comes down to. Prendergast is now one of the major landowners in this area. How do you plan a new feudal landscape? Ireland was not obviously part of the Norman sort of patrimony, so how did they go about actually putting it up? Paul McCullough in his Medieval Ireland, there are various Gaelic land divisions that the Normans are quite practical. They come in and they realise they don't know the land as well as people who live here, and they take over existing political divisions, things like church divisions, and also these things called truxesets, sort of land division that sort of equates with what the Welsh were calling a cantred system in the Angevin territories. So they're coming in, they're using these existing Irish land systems and sort of trying to turn them to their own sort of their own use. Like the Normans, like I say, keep saying, incredibly practical people. If it doesn't need to be changed, they're not going to change it. If they can make money and people continue to pay their rents, that's all they really want. So, like I say, the Prendergast territories, there's three of them there, but they all coincide with rural deaneries. So they're using the church structure that's already been set up as a sort of backbone to their sort of their new political system. So they're very good at piggybacking on things. They're not going to come in and completely rip the system apart. They've known from their expansion across Europe, if you use the traditional systems that are already there and tweak them and get a new haircut in place, you're set. So, subinfeudation. Whereas the land division was part of the process of feudal division, whereby the king claimed his right over all the lands under his throne by allodial right. There's no higher authority than the king on earth. So he claims basically, I'm God's rep, I'm claiming all this. But one man can't manage all of the Angevin Empire. So they have to hand it to barons, and they have to hand it to their guys, and it goes on further down the chain. And that's the feudal system that we all sort of know and love. But the services were usually military in nature. Like the kings of England did not have standing armies, and this is how they made their armies when they needed them. it was military service. Your barons would pay you so many knights, and they would subinfeudate their lands to people with knights' fees, and they would provide a certain level of military service. But by the 12th century, this military service has already been replaced by monetary payments, such as scutage. And even though people still turn up at Dublin and say, I want to do my military service, the government, even by 1300s, is going, would you not rather just pay the money and go home? So you get odd accounts in the annals of people going, yeah, 2 knights have turned up at the gates. Well done, lads. But they just say, like, would you not just give us a check? So, like I say, that you get to see how a very sort of militaristic system is already starting to get more and more changed into money and land rents like that. So the land division has a range of other considerations. Like I say, the military service has already started to change to a monetary system in certain regards. But whenever you're setting this up as a lord, once you've got your domain lands are your central lands you're going to hold for farming to basically make your land tenders work for you, have your own food supplies, and maybe make a bit of cash. Then you have to start thinking how you're going to set up new towns, new settlements, protect your rootways, and even the church. The church were very good at hanging around. Henry II was traumatized by the church after he inadvertently murdered an Archbishop of Canterbury. But the Templars and the church were on that boat with Henry coming to Waterford. The Templars hounded him so much that as soon as he got off the boat, he would just have part of Wexford and leave me alone. The church were always very good at keeping an eye on new lands being developed and sort of going, well, we could help with this. So, and like I say, they had their connections with the Irish church already. So again, if they were using the Irish church as a sort of backbone of some of their political developments, it made sense to keep the church on side. One of the primary considerations, like I said, was the ability of a vassal such as the Prendergast to attract settlement to his territories. That's why some people have seen it as a surprise the amount of land that Prendergast gets, because he doesn't have experience of this amount of land management. But it's also, Strongbow has realised that if he bases him along the east coast, he's got connections in Wales, and this might encourage more people. It might be an easy transfer of land-hungry sort of Flemish guys who are trapped in Wales to actually come. So he's thinking ahead, thinking, how can I get more settlement in here? Kind of not quite replace the Irish, but even up the odds a bit. And a strong Prendergast settlement would not only make more money for him, make a more settled structure, it would also prevent encroachment north from Wexford and also south from the royal land. So Strongbow's always thinking in the back of his head, how can I secure these lands and make them more safe for me? He's always kind of on the run politically, and that'll be important later on in the talk whenever he gets slightly further up the political scale. And de Clare also may have hoped the military organisation, the Flemings in Wales, was important. The Flemings had come in, and there's a lot of debate, and we covered this in the first talk in Gorey, where the Flemings had actually come from. There's all these wonderful Angevin tales of the Netherlands got flooded and we invited them over by the goodness for our heart, and then we settled them and stuff. They're really good at militias and local militias. And they settle them in around the north of Scotland, first of all, to settle the border there. Henry I brings them into Wales deliberately to settle troublesome parts of Wales, and they love a scrap. So I think de Clare is also thinking in his background, if I settle this guy and they've got really good, strong local militias basically made up of crossbowmen and archers, I don't have to garrison it. These guys will look after the land themselves, and they've already proven that they will not shy away from a fight. So I'll just leave them to it. They'll hold the land. I don't really have to build many castles or do anything military that would cost me money or prestige. So the Prendergast settlement in North Wexford, that's kind of what we're our sort of look at the minute, because it's always been sort of seen as the Wild West. There's not a lot going on up there, definitely, Norman, and it's kind of interesting for its blank slate, interest, especially for historians and archaeologists. There are tantalizing little bits and pieces around the place, but there's not a heavy duty investment of Anglo or Campro-Norman infrastructure that you would expect. So like I said, Billy Colfer's Arrogant Trespass. He suggested Kilpipe Mott. I don't know where the rest of you know it. It's up in North Wexford. It's actually in Wicklow now. We gave it away. But it's this very big Mott site. Have any of you been to Parish Court Mott in the Parish Court estate? Okay, so the traditional idea about a motte and bailey is you've got your conical little hill, you've got your bailey at the bottom. That works well when everyone's playing nice. If you're in a really contested country and you want, like, the first thing you're going to do is burn your bailey. So if you take all your auxiliary buildings and stick them up on top of a bigger hill, everything's more protected. So there's been a lot of debate about it comes into ringworks and how mottes are viewed in Ireland. And archaeologists are always having these sort of debates amongst themselves because we have no lives. But the ringwork in Ireland and the motte, everyone sort of always expected the mottes to be the thing we're looking for. But now the ringworks are what we're kind of fascinated in. What was the decision-making power going on between ringworks and mottes and things like that? Even trim was a ringwork originally. It wasn't a motte. There's no real reason for it. They get confused a lot between large raths and large enclosures, and there's a whole debate about, where do you see? Because like I said, Normans, incredibly practical people, would pick up a rath and quite happily just turn it into something else if they don't need to extend the effort. So this Kilpipe one is kind of an interesting one because we're trying to explore where the centres were. Like I've said, there's not a lot of really determined Anglo-Norman hardware out there that we can grip onto. So Kilpipe, like I said, it's that red dot there, and it's up in Wicklow at the minute. That very close dotted line is actually the modern county boundary, but then the Prendergast one is the actual dashed line above that. You can sort of see from the 1830s maps there, you've got a church in ruins next to it, and you can just see this sort of circle above it that doesn't look very impressive. That's Kilpipe. But if you go on to the next slide, that's it. That's not your traditional motte and bailey. That is a modified hill where everything is up on top. There's one entrance in, and yeah, look, it's not going to save you in the long run, but it makes it much more difficult, and someone will have to think twice about attacking that. If you ever have a chance to go to Powerscourt Motte, that's a beautiful example. It's an Archbishop's one as well, but again, everything is up on top. You can see for absolute miles. So again, it was always thought of as a kaput centre, which would be a sort of manorial centre. But more and more we're kind of debating, is this a frontier or a fortification? Something that heavy duty might just be because you can't trust the rest of the landscape around you. And the fact it's up on frontier land might just be one of those things. Moybeg, which is just southeast of Enniscorthy, is another one. It's always been sort of said it's Prendergast sort of kaput centre again, but it may just be that that's one of the original sort of ringworks that were set up when they were settling the land. I mean, they had to make their statement point somewhere. The kaput centres may actually, like Enniscorthy Castle itself, comes about 100 years afterwards. So what's in between? What are they doing when they're settling the landscape? It's just an interesting question. It'll go on for years, but that's the joy of archaeology and history. Like, you can debate as the cows come home. Again, that's the description of the site. For those of you who have lives and don't read the archaeological survey, if you see a number like that next to a national monument, so you have WI, that's Wicklow, 39 is the map sequence, and 16 is the number of the when they set it up in the 40s and 50s. So archaeologists and historians will read these things, will be able to take the map references apart. It's described as an oval site located in the southeast edge of a natural ridge. Again, Normans, incredibly practical people. Why build a hill? We can just find one and knock the top off it. Much easier. Exterior dimensions are 62 by 50 meters, like a big hill you're talking about. And the summit is about 41 meters by 32. Now that's a ring fort size. To give you comparable sizes, mottes generally would have a 9 to 10 meter, summit. So something 4 times that size, they're definitely trying to get all their auxiliary buildings up there. And it's formed by a modification of the ridge. The site is surrounded by a steep-sided fosse and an external bank, which is interesting in itself. It's a counterscarp system. So what they've done is, obviously you've got your hill like this. When you dig a ditch at the bottom, you can't pile that up on the side, so you pile it on the outside. So again, there are more and more defences piling on this thing. So it's a counterscarp ditch or a bank on the outside, and that makes it incredible. You've increased your ditch size by about 1.5 meters by just piling up the spoil. So it's a heavy-duty fortification, and it's not something that's really thought about lightly. I think there's a lot of planning goes into these things. They go way back. I mean, that's our traditional idea of the motte from like the Bayeux Tapestry. Big hill, get the locals to do it, big pointy stick, and they can knock one up in a couple of days. Normans were very good at poking people to put up mots really quickly. The original mots they came across in the Hastings, that was one of the reasons the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms folded so easily. They were flat pack castles. The Normans have been planning this for a while, and they came across with an IKEA version of a tower and just put it up. And everyone went, oh, there wasn't a castle there yesterday. That's not good. So again, there's a nice little example from the Bayou. There's nothing from the Harrying of the North. But you can see there the classic idea, quite a small hill. You've got your palisade on top and your tower. But these are not designed to be defended for long. Basically, if your auxiliary buildings have been torched, as the guys are doing, you're only going to hold out there for a day or two. Like the whole idea of a mott and bailey is to send signal to your closest forces, but you're not holding out there for a long time. So you better have a plan. And so that's what most people think of in terms of a mott and bailey with the very sort of conical hill. And again, like I think Kilpite represents a ringwork and a very specialised one at that. So we're beginning to already see a different type of elements in how the Prendergast are settling things. And we'll just actually go back because one of the things that hasn't really been teased out is you can see the top part of the landscape here, Caloniernan. There's a very specialised way that if a settlement area is named after something, that's got to be the settlement sort of centre. And Caloniernan, the village, is actually a rural deanery. Remember I said about them piggybacking on the church structure that's already there? We may have been totally overlooking that there's a manorial kaput already sitting there. It maybe doesn't have a castle set because there's been so much development in the Caloniernan area in post-Med period. We're only looking at what we've got now and trying to piece it back. But if you go the other way and try and piece together the land holdings and then see what might be missing, that gives you more of a clear idea of what might be happening. So whereas we've been looking at these impressive mots up on the border, are we missing a trick that we're actually just missing the name of the place all along and just it's sitting in Caloniernan and waiting for us? So that again, that's another traditional sort of idea of a mott and bailey, your traditional little ridge, your auxiliary buildings around the base. But again, that's in a very well settled landscape where you're not expecting, where everyone's behaving themselves. You know, if you're going to be attacked every other week, you've got to think of something else. The other sort of those are the ringworks, the heavy duty ones in frontiers. Middleton, which is also Ardmane, and Palace. These have been put together as sort of the classic motts and baileys. This one, you can see the two orange dots. Middleton, which is also Ardmane, and Palace. These have been put together as sort of the classic motts and baileys. This one, you can see the two orange dots. The northern one is actually Palace, and the southern one is actually Ardmane right on the coast. The image from Google Earth beside it is actually of Middleton. You can, again, beside a church, and quite a well-known church. So again, they're piggybacking on that structure. But these are much smaller things. These are not. There's a constant debate in archaeology and history between the words defensible and defended. A defended settlement is something you've got people on the walls all the time. Defensible means you can defend it in a pinch. These are defensible structures. They're set up to stamp authority on minor lordships who don't have the money or the power to put up more impressive structures, but you can defend them if you need to. So you can sort of see on the next slide, this is Middleton Mott as it is today. I mean, it's whenever we go into the description of it compared to the other ones, we had 40-50 meters of a summit. That's quite a sizable area to be including your auxiliary buildings. Like Middleton only has 7 meters on top. You're going to stick a tower there and it's going to be cramped. You're not going to be up there for a long time. So again, you're starting to see the different, whenever you visit these things or whenever you look at them in terms of structural viewpoint, you can start to pick apart the idea of the Normans have one idea of what a kaput should be or a sort of fortified settlement. It's much more fluid than that. They're definitely very practical in how they're setting up their land holdings. And also these smaller ones give us an insight into the Prendergast themselves have to subinfeudate their lands. The Prendergast are only so many people. So they're having to bring in people to basically make up these little estates to pay them and to sort of finance their armies. One of the interesting things, I'm actually from Cortown, like archaeologists, just as soon as you set up shop in somewhere, you start reading around it. Cortown, bizarrely enough, gets mentioned in 1315 in the royal estates of, I think it's Edward II, who starts buying up royal estates in Ireland whenever they go out of ownership and they go into the royal ward, and they start buying them up as royal domain. Cortown's mentioned as the owners of Ardamain Mott have been knocking the absolute pan out of it for about 20 years, burning it regularly to try and get it off the hold of Christina de Riddlesford, who's a landowner in the area. And they're having this little private war between these two minor estates. Like, they're only small, really small areas. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer warns Edward that if he buys it, he'll start a war in Ireland that may not go out. And this whole huge land deal collapses because two lads with minor motts can't get on. So it's an interesting thing, like even minor things can make it into big royal documents. And you start to think then, like, the idea that these lads are sitting there with their little motts and everyone's very, sitting in a big hall enjoying themselves. They're not, they're out burning each other out just for the crack. So again, a nice little one. I would recommend Middleton, gorgeous little spot. So that's kind of an idea of the variation that's going on. And sort of what we're coming towards the end of it is the Great Revolt in 1173. Henry II has a problem. Henry II has sons, too many sons. And Henry II doesn't like handing out money or power. You let your sons have enough power in terms of letting them have their little households and sort of income and learning how to run government. But you don't want them becoming so cocky they're going to sit up against you. It's exactly what happens. For all his power and control, Henry loses control. In 1173, he's already crowned his son Henry, again, as the young king. So it's sort of co-regency thing going on. And Eleanor of Aquitaine, amazing woman. She's the one who brings France to Henry. And she ends up her life under house arrest because Henry's so afraid of her. But she convinces her son, he's virtually under house arrest. So they sneak out of the house one night, or the castle, and they go to the French king and threaten to break up the Angevin Empire. They go, if you give me like Normandy, I'll give you this and all the rest of it. Henry's incensed. Richard Lionheart joins in because he just loves a scrap. He says to his father he'll have to root him out of Poitiers by his own hands. So basically even Richard at 16 is a complete nutcase. But Henry and all the rest of them, they all go in this great revolt. Henry has to go to France to stamp this out. It stands a genuine chance of tearing the Angevin Empire apart at this point, and Henry's not having any of it. Again, it stems from grievances over inheritance and power dynamics, and the various princes sought to assert their rights over territories. Henry, the young prince, was renowned as having the most glorious and expensive court in Christendom, but with no income. So everything was on tick, and basically he was willing to break up the Angevin Empire to pay for having this expensive court. But it just shows you the seriousness. But Strongbow gets his comeuppance, or his opportunity. He's been handing quite a lot of land in Leinster, but he's not justiciar. He's not any of the big political. He's just a major landowner in Ireland, but he's got no political power in the Angevin Empire. And Henry still holds a grudge. He's a great man. Even he'd been quite happy if de Clare never rises above holding land in Leinster. He's got him where he needs him. He's brought in his own men when he lands in Waterford at Hugh de Lacy and sets them up in Meath and things like that, and just says, go for it. But they're the power players. De Clare's still sulking in the background. Henry sends out a call for aid. Bring your soldiers to Normandy. We've got to stem this. De Clare turns up. He especially enjoys it because he outwits his great rival, Hugh de Lacy. Hugh de Lacy is holding a town for Henry and capitulates, just as Henry and Strongbow ride over the horizon with a relief force. And Strongbow goes, I wouldn't have done that. I would have held the town for you, no problem. So he gets his little sort of his little enjoyments there. He holds an important castle called Guisère in Normandy on the frontier, which is quite important. And he does such a good job that Henry II brings him to Rouen and appoints him Justiciar of Ireland. He's reached now the height of, like, Henry has now realised this guy can be actually useful. Appoints him Justiciar and says, right, take your trips, go home on the proviso, you sort Ireland out, and you send everyone else back. So you basically send all your... Strongbow can't believe his luck. He's going home to send all the lads who hate him back to Normandy, possibly to die in a campaign, and he's now in charge of Ireland. Strongbow, like I say, a competent sort of strategist, he already uses the opportunity with his chief vassals to expand his power base. On the boat back, he has a guy called Walter de Riddlesford with him. Walter de Riddlesford, minor lord, second son. He's mentioned in the deeds of the Normans in Ireland. He does various things. He takes out this Viking berserker outside the gates of Dublin, but he's not got a big power base. Henry has handed de Clare, said sort out Dublin. We think there are revolts happening on the back of the Great Revolt in Ireland. The Vikings who've been left sort of landless have suddenly risen up in the royal domains. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of heavy duty investment in keeping these things settled. And on the boat back, somehow Walter de Riddlesford gets handed a load of royal land that he has no right to hand over. He gets a massive grant in Wicklow for like 5 nights' fees that should have been much more than that. And you can see de Clare sitting on his boat just going right with a map going, what can we take now? I'll just say it's in revolt, you hold it, it'll be grand. And he knows Henry's going to be distracted for a while with this, so he can get away with it. And like I say, the Walter de Riddlesford is a good example of it, but also happens further south. This sort of area, you can see in between the red and the yellow there. So this is the D'Angelo grant. Sometime before 1176, a new guy comes on the scene and gets this D'Angelo grant. It's not very well defined about where it is, or sort of the exact borders of it. We know it fits in between the Prendergast's main holdings. I think it's one of these. I think it's strategically important. It's got the Slaney Gap between the Blackstairs and the Wicklow Mountains and the valley of the Derry River. It's strategically important. And I think Strongbows probably at this point had enough of the Prendergast. Maybe they haven't been fulfilling their end of the bargain. Maybe they haven't been as dutiful as they could in settling lands. And I think he brings in someone new as part of this new position as Justiciar. I think he just goes, right, grand, carve out land, hand it to you, grand. And that's why we have very little idea of exactly the borders of it. And it's one element that we're researching at the minute, just what exactly was brought in at this case. Again, another example of de Clare taking the initiative and just seeing the slightest little political gap and just widening it for himself. What does this mean for the Prendergast in North Wexford? They hang on, but they're to the end. The colony starts collapsing in the late 1300s and early 1400s or 14th century. But they start trying to get rid of things. It works for a while, but there's not, like I said, the heavy duty infrastructure to hold on to it. Dublin and the Pale does not have the resources to give to them to defend this colony. And they start seeing the Prendergast give away lands to things like the De Roches and trying to bring in new settlers. One of the interesting things is around Palace Mott, there's a couple of moated sites. Now, moated sites are 13th century, slightly later on in the colony, and they're slightly middle-class farmers, but they're still defensible enclosures. And we think they're bringing in these fresh guys, almost going to England on a Ponzi scheme and going, there's land over there. It's lovely. You should go and try and settle that. I think these relate to sometimes the breakup of the estates and trying to bring in fresh blood to sort it all out. Now, obviously, the whole thing goes on, but we're going to bring ourselves to a close with the end of de Clare. There he is in all his glory in Christchurch, having a good hour rest. I just love this quote from his sister. In June 1176, she writes to her husband, Raymond the Grow, "That great tooth in my jaw, which is worn to ache so much, is now fallen out." It's this coded message: get yourself back to Dublin now with the army, because it's all going to go to pot very, very quickly. And the de Clare sort of scheming comes to an end at that point. The Marshals take over after a certain point, and there's a bit of an interesting story in that as well, and we might explore that in more talks. But you've got a very small period of like 20 years there where you've got a lot going on. You've got the highs, the lows, you've got minor lords taking on massive land holdings, and quite a lot of speculation, which historians and archaeologists love, about what exactly is going on in the background. It's all very important looking at the moths and what we can see on the ground, but it's the politics and the people that are absolutely fascinating with the Normans. And yeah, look, lots more to talk about, and hopefully for the next couple of years we'll be enjoying ourselves with more of this.